This is The Jason Jones Show, powered by Mudhouse Media. Now, here's Jason Jones.
Aloha, everybody, and welcome to The Jason Jones Show. I am your host, Jason Jones, broadcasting from the beautiful hill country of Texas. Spring has arrived. Spring has arrived early in Texas. The birds were singing today. The sun is out. The sky is almost that bright, brilliant, beautiful blue that I miss so much from Hawaii. It's a great day. And today, I have a great interview with the Reverend L. He is a Christian pastor from Hong Kong. We're not going to tell you his denomination, and his name isn't Reverend L., but this is to protect his identity because, of course, the CCP is a brutal regime, and I'm sure one could go to prison simply for listening to this podcast, let alone being on it. So to preserve his identity, we're calling him Father L. And of all of the interviews I've ever done, I really learned a lot. He's a very wise man, and I think you are going to learn a lot. So listen to the show. Share this show with your friends. I want to get right on to the interview. This episode is being brought to you by Mike Lindell's MyPillow. Go to mypillow.com. Use the code Jones in the radio listener square. You get those deep discounts. This episode is also being brought to you by the Vulnerable People Project, standing in solidarity with the vulnerable. Go to thegreatcampaign.org, become a monthly donor, get a free copy of my book, The Race to Save Our Century. I wrote that with the great John Zmirak, and he'll be coming on this weekend as we do a weekend wrap-up extravaganza. Now, we interview the mysterious, the great Reverend L. Jason Jones Show. Aloha, Reverend L. Welcome to the Jason Jones Show.
Hi, Jason. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing good, and it's a privilege to have you. I know that Reverend L is a pseudonym. It's not your name. So you're coming on the show at some risk to speak up for the people of Hong Kong. And so thank you for coming on our show and for taking this risk.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So what we've been doing on the show is we're calling it the pentathlon of podcasting, which is kind of cheesy. But what we want to do is each day of the Genocide Olympics, which is an epic scandal. It is a great scandal. It's a scandal to the world. We want to take the opportunity and stand on the stumbling block to amplify the abuses of the CCP, not only on the people of the captive nations, but on Hong Kong, its threats to Taiwan, and also around the world. And, we know the world knows about well, maybe they don't, but we've talked about over 1 million children have been separated from their parents in Tibet, 3 million Uyghur in concentration camps, the rhetoric and the increased harassment of Taiwan. But there seems to be almost a complete media blackout, or maybe because the crimes seem to people to pale in comparison. What's happening in Tibet and what's happening to the Uyghur seem to pale in comparison. What's happening in Hong Kong pales in comparison. But what's striking is 3 decades ago, is it fair to say Hong Kong was probably the freest place on the planet Earth?
I would say until fairly recently, until like 20 years ago, until 97.
Until the transition. It was
even after the transition, I would say, they slowly cracked down on freedom, but I would say even before 2019, Hong Kong is still pretty free. There are some restrictions, but for the most part, I would say it's a free city until 2019.
So explain to the folks what's been happening. We have a crackdown on religion. We have a crackdown on the freedom of press. In a place that has this long tradition of freedom, it has to be striking to the people who live there.
Indeed. Hong Kong was under the rule of the British for over 100 years until 1997. So we really have a very, very good and fair judicial system. We have freedom of press, freedom of assembly. If you guys remember back in 2019, we had a huge protest in which 2 million people went on the street. So I would say, Hong Kong before 2019 was the beacon of freedom in Asia. And yet, things just went downhill in the past 20 months. So, I mean, I think the CCP is great in the sense that they are able to completely transform a city, from a free city to like Manhattan, or any city in the United States, to a totalitarian regime, like any city in mainland China. Because of the passage of the National Security Law back in 2020, July 2020.
What was the excuse or the impetus for the passing of that National Security Law? Was it the freedom protests?
Well, they use that as an excuse. If you look at the CCP document back in 2015, they already think about imposing a national security law to every single part of China, including Hong Kong and Macau. But they just haven't got a good excuse to implement that in Hong Kong until the 2019 protests started. So the 2019 protests lasted for around 6 months or so. And eventually, because of COVID, the protests stopped and died down. So in July 2020, the CCP really took advantage of COVID, because people could not go on the street to protest. They just implemented this law into Hong Kong, not through the Hong Kong legislature, but through the Beijing legislature. So what they did was that they passed the law in Beijing and impose that to the Hong Kong people. So I guess they all, yeah.
Explain to the folks, what was the impetus for the protests to begin with?
So back in 2019, the Hong Kong government, they wanted to impose an extradition bill. Basically, if that bill is passed, anyone in Hong Kong could potentially be sent to China for trial for whatever crimes that you commit. So, I would say before 2019, one of the main differences between Hong Kong and China is the judicial system. Hong Kong, because of the British rule, we always have a common law system. You cannot, if you're arrested, the police will either charge you within 48 hours or they will have to release you. I mean, there is fair trial, open door trial, but in China, there is no fair trial. Oftentimes, they would appoint lawyers. The government would appoint lawyers for the defendants, and oftentimes the trials are conducted behind closed doors. And I would say, for certain crimes like political crimes, the conviction rate is as high as 99%. So essentially, the extradition bill would imply that for anyone in Hong Kong, even for crimes committed in Hong Kong, they would potentially put you in jail. They would put you to court in trial. They would put you to trial in court in China, and then you would basically undergo the unfair judicial process in China. So people are extremely worried that what happened if they are sent to China for trial, right? So that's why people went on the street for protest. The protest, the biggest one was 2 million, and then there's another one in which 1 million people went on the street. Imagine Hong Kong only has a 7 million population. So basically, almost 1/3 of the population went on the street on that day to protest against this extradition bill.
That's really unbelievable. Well, you look at now. Jimmy Lai was arrested, the prominent Hong Kong businessman, for participating in one of these marches. Correct? That was it. He was disappeared, sent to prison, and I guess he has 2 more years. And it was because he just walked in a protest.
That's right. I mean, the CCP really charged him with multiple charges, not just for that. I mean, of course, one of the charges was marching, participating in the march. Another charge that he received was lighting a candle on June 4th, on the day that we commemorate the Tiananmen Square massacre. What happened was, I think June 4th, 2020, he was lighting a candle on the streets, and the government charged him for inciting hatred against the government just for lighting a candle. It's as ridiculous as that. And he was put. I mean, that particular incident, he was sent to jail for months just for lighting a candle. And I mean, he has multiple charges. He has national security law charges, meaning that I would say most likely he would be jailed for the rest of his life. He's now 74, and I presume that the CCP would make sure that he would never be free again.
I mean, if they free him, they're freeing a martyr and a hero.
Right, and he will be lucky if they do not send him back to China. I mean, imagine how the condition in a mainland Chinese prison will be much worse than the Hong Kong prison.
No, it's unimaginable. Are you familiar with the case of Bishop Joseph Zhang Weizhu? Forgive me, my wife's Chinese.
In China?
Yeah, he's a Chinese Catholic bishop, and he was disappeared. He's in prison
for 25 years, right?
Is that what it is? I don't know. So now he's been disappeared, and he was part of the Patriotic Church. He was
underground church, right?
No, he was a bishop that was approved with the Vatican, the secret agreement between China, the CCP and the Vatican. He was approved, and yet I believe, and yet he was disappeared with his bishop, with his priests and seminarians. And God forbid that comes to Hong Kong. Joseph Zhang Weizhu, Weizhu.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that. But there's one interesting story was in Shanghai back in 2012. There is a patriotic priest. He was chosen to be bishop in Shanghai, and then he received the approval both from the Vatican and the CCP. What happened was, on the day he was consecrated to be a bishop, he made a formal announcement that he would no longer be part of the Patriotic Association. With that statement, he has been in detention ever since. The PCCP jailed him. I mean, on the day he was ordained a bishop, because of that one statement that he made, because of his refusal to cooperate with the government, he has been jailed, and all his seminaries and his seminary in Shanghai was closed down for a few years because of that. It's ridiculous.
Well, China, the CCP, I hate to say China. What's horrifying to me is I'm from Hawaii. My wife is Chinese. Her mother's actually from Hong Kong. My wife is first generation American. And with the Cultural Revolution and generations of totalitarian socialism, I feel like the CCP is obliterating Chinese culture in China. And that Chinese culture lives in Hong Kong. It lives in Taiwan. It lives in places like Chinatown and San Francisco and Hawaii.
That's right.
And so this is really, ironically, preserving freedom in Hong Kong is about preserving the last vestiges of Chinese culture.
That's right. Yeah. As simple as the Chinese characters. When the CCP took over, they simplified the character, which is not the way Chinese wrote, for thousands of years. They totally butchered the language and simplified the character. Just for one interesting example, the Chinese word for love, right? In the traditional Chinese, there is a heart in the middle of the character. But then for the simplified character that they have used it for the past 60 years, they have took out the heart from the word love. It's just the way they butcher the Chinese language and the Chinese culture. It's just ridiculous.
Well, and then the one-child policy, culture lives within families. And
that's right.
You don't have aunts, uncles, and cousins. You can't have a culture survive in a society without aunts, uncles, and cousins and
That's right.
festivals
That's
and
right.
religious traditions. So in Hong Kong
That's
now,
right.
we see the CCP, I think rightly understands that any philosophy, not only religion, but any philosophy that acknowledges a transcendent moral order or even a vague numinous reality beyond materialism is deemed as a mortal threat to the CCP. Is that what's going on?
Yes, I would think so because communism is intrinsically atheistic. They don't believe in God. I mean, they only believe in material things. So yeah, anything transcendent and anything that would potentially, draw people's attention away from the party or from Xi Jinping, they would not be happy with that. Not even transcendental thing. I mean, in China, they have, there's, in the past years, they have kind of like a ranking of like pop star, right? Each week, they have which star is number one, which star is number two in terms of popularity. They have done away with that. Like Xi Jinping cannot even stand pop star.
He can't even tolerate Instagram models. He can't compete with teenage girls dancing in their closet.
Exactly. Yeah, he has the first commandment, right? Thou shalt worship one God, right? Thou shalt not worship anyone before me. I mean, I think that's really his model. Yeah.
Now that's St. John Paul the Great. I don't know if you're Catholic or evangelical or Protestant. I want to ask you to answer that. But St. John Paul the Great, in his last book, Memory and Identity, said that, when the Nazis rolled into Poland and then after they left and the communists rolled in, he said he always knew that those regimes would collapse because of his theology, that evil is a deprivation and ideologies of evil will eventually die under their own weight. Can the CCP continue? It seems to be such a fragile state, and these Beijing Olympics are as the biggest catastrophe. This is the biggest propaganda catastrophe that I have ever seen. It just seems that it's revealed to the world the true nature of this regime. Can the CCP continue at the pace it's going?
I mean, if the West continues with, if the West continues with placing economic interest ahead of human rights, I think the CCP would probably last for some more years. So I think the West really has the responsibility in that regard. I mean, they have to stop doing businesses with China, with the CCP. I mean, because the CCP relies on the West doing businesses with them, right? So I mean, I think it's hard to say. I mean, when the CCP is gonna completely fall apart, but the thing is, with all the surveillance technology or monitoring system in China, is very, very difficult for people to revolt because all the instant messages, all the emails in China, they are completely censored and monitored by the Chinese government. So they will be able to stop any revolts or any messages that would potentially threaten quote unquote national security. And stop any protest. I mean, protest is not even possible in China because in order to organize a protest, you have to, organize people to go on the street, right? Maybe by social media or by messaging. But all these are censored, so people can't even, receive messages from social media. If those messages will be deleted immediately by the internet police if they are deemed to be threatening national security. So in that sense, I mean, it's more difficult. I mean, we think about different revolutions in the past 20, 30 years. It's more difficult for these revolutions to happen in China. So I guess what's likely to happen is the downfall of economy in China. That would probably lead to its ultimate demolition. But that being said, I mean, what's going to happen after CCP falls apart? That's another question. I mean, is there going to be a civil war? I mean, who's going to take control of the country if the CCP falls apart? I mean, that will be a very, very interesting question.
And the West, we've been short-sighted and selfish. We failed the people of Russia. We failed the people of Eastern Europe. After the fall of the Soviet Union, we continued to pursue our own aggressive self-interest instead of.
That's right.
Montesquieu, one of my favorite quotes from Montesquieu is, "In times of peace, we are to do other nations as much possible good as we can, and in times of war, we're to pursue the least possible harm in trying to achieve victory to them."
Right.
And I hope we learn from the problems we've created with Russia when the CCP does fall with China.
Right. And I think, the reason that the CCP is so strong economically is because of the American engagement policy in the past 30 years that has really, helped the economic growth of China and without any, I guess the Americans thought that, by helping them grow financially, economically, they would improve the human rights condition, right? But that did not happen. Instead, it had actually gone worse in the past 7 years under Xi Jinping.
We were naive. As a young college Republican in the 90s, I campaigned for most favored nation status for China. And our talking point was, if China has permanent most favored nation status, and as we interlock our economies, China will become more like us. But sadly, what's happened, I think we've become more like the CCP. And to that point, I'll share something with you that's horrifying. My organization, we seek to influence on behalf of vulnerable communities and using media. We bought the best seats in the house at NBA games around the country this season. And when there'd be a penalty right in front of where our people were sitting, we would unfurl huge banners that the cameras couldn't miss that said "Free Hong Kong" or "Free Tibet" or "Free the Uyghur." And of course, doing this caused China to cut the feed immediately. And a reporter investigated how much money our program cost the NBA this season was $200 million. So, but I was emailing a journalist, asked me questions about the protest, and I forwarded images of the protest and da-da-da. Google wouldn't let me send the content. And it kept saying, "This email contains banned content." And all I was doing was answering this reporter's questions on the Uyghur genocide.
Yes, all the big tech companies, they are looking at the big business market in China. Yep, Google, YouTube, even Tesla, they opened a store in Xinjiang a few weeks ago.
I'm really disappointed in Elon Musk with that. You have Disney, they make Mulan, they change the story to make the Uyghur the bad people. They shoot it in Xinjiang or East Turkestan, which is startling, which is really unbelievable. You know what this is going to be my next column. The Beijing Genocide Olympics brought to us by NBC drove home this point, that neoliberalism, whatever that is, and the CCP are allies. And there is no defeating the CCP without pushing back neoliberalism in the West.
Right.
Because they are shameless in their defense of the CCP. Now, in Hong Kong's relationship with the UK, that's a special relationship. In the UK, has there been an outcry from the government there on behalf of the people of Hong Kong?
Yes, they actually have been very generous to the Hong Kong people. They granted kind of like a green card to anyone born in Hong Kong before 97. So anyone born in Hong Kong before 97, they could go to UK and live there. And after 6 years, they will be granted UK citizenship. So I would say at least 100,000 people have left permanently for the UK already from Hong Kong. And I think this trend is going to continue, especially those families with young kids, because they do not want kids to be brainwashed in Hong Kong by the CCP, national security education. So in that regard, the UK government has been pretty generous to the Hong Kong people. And then and then they actually receive pretty good treatment when they arrive in the UK. I mean, we actually benefiting the UK as well because usually when people Hong Kong has we have very expensive apartments. So on average, I would say when a family leaves Hong Kong, for another country or emigration, they would bring at least $1 to $2 million US dollars from Hong Kong to that country, because even like an 800 square feet apartment would cost at least $1 million US in Hong Kong. So we're actually kind of contributing to the UK economy by being there. So they're they appreciate that as well. So I guess it's a win-win situation for the Hong Kong people and the UK government.
Yep, but even with that, and I'm glad that they're offering that generous the rights to emigrate. But again, it's just sad to me because in a way it kind of is perpetuating this cultural genocide that the CCP started. There's the old saying. You remember the old saying that whoever conquers China becomes Chinese. But unfortunately, the CCP has conquered China.
Right. So, the idea is that Hong Kong people, when they move to UK, that's where they would preserve the Hong Kong culture, like the cuisine.
That's true.
Languages, because I would say 10 years down the road in Hong Kong, they probably would not even let schools teach Cantonese anymore. Everyone would have to speak Mandarin, which is the official language of China. And they have been trying to eliminate, a lot of Hong Kong style stuff, from the British colonial era. So I would say maybe 10, 20 years from now, you could only find a real Hong Kong in the UK, maybe in London, but not in Hong Kong, because by
Honolulu,
that time,
you can find it in Hawaii. I promise you.
Yeah, because by that time, they would have completely wiped out everything, that is uniquely Hong Kong, and replace that with the mainland Chinese CCP socialist stuff. From language to culture to, the way they run the government, stuff like that. So.
Yeah, it's sorrowful. Now, this is a tough question, and it might be impolite for me to ask you. I'm Catholic, and but I think probably the greatest scandal in the history of our church is the Sino-Vatican Agreement of 2018. I would much rather have woken up that day to hear that Pope Francis has invaded Sicily with his mistress and children in tow. Okay, I'd be happy. Okay, good. He's got an army. He's kicking the Normans out of Sicily. Good for him.
Yeah.
That would have pleased me. But this agreement really broke my heart. First and foremost, because my own co-religionists, Christians, are suffering, but also the Falun Gong, also the Han Chinese who are suffered under the one-child policy, and the Uyghur. Yeah. Pope Francis hasn't said a single word, has never said the word Uyghur out loud. He wrote the word down once in a letter where he buried it in several hundred issues. And the Uyghur was in there. But that's the only time he's ever written the word. Without this agreement, would this abuse have been able to go forward?
Without this agreement?
Yeah, if the Vatican didn't kneel to Xi, would this crackdown of the churches, would the harassment of Cardinal Zen, the arrest of Jimmy Lai, the disappearing of Catholic bishops across China, without this agreement, would this have? Because I don't think so, and here's why. If the church in the West stood up for the people being oppressed by totalitarian socialism in China, the way we stood up for white Christians who are being suffering under totalitarian socialism in Eastern Europe, if we stood up for the Chinese the way we fought for the Russians, the way our churches constantly prayed for the persecuted church in Russia, I will tell you, we are thoughtless to the persecuted church in China, and it is never mentioned. I was at the International Religious Freedom Conference in Washington, D.C. Even Blinken and Pelosi mentioned China's abuses to the church. There was only one speaker that didn't mention China in his speech, and that was Cardinal Dolan of New York City. Didn't mention China. Didn't. Every other speaker, Blinken, Pelosi. How do you speak at the International Religious Freedom Conference and not mention China? And I have to think that he was muzzled by the Vatican. And
he has to follow the line of the Vatican. He cannot go against Francis.
And Francis can't go against Xi.
Right. Yeah, it's very sad. I mean, I went to a speech given to Sam Brownback, who was the ambassador at large of religious freedom at the UN. He was asked what was the biggest disappointment, so to speak, during his time as ambassador. And then he said it was his inability to convince the Vatican not to strike a deal with China. He said it publicly at a conference. And yes, I agree with totally with your observation. Also, I talked to a friend who is a Tibet Buddhist, and he told me that Dalai Lama, he actually wrote a personal letter to Pope Francis, asking him, not to strike a deal with the CCP. So we have important people like Dalai Lama, who suffer personally under the CCP, advising the Pope not to do that, and yet, he still did it. I mean, this is the reality that we have to face right now. I mean, I always think about Pope John Paul II and Ronald Reagan. They were good friends, and one is Catholic, one is Protestant, and they worked together to take down Soviet communism. So I think, we have a strong Catholic Pope. We have a strong, Christian, American president. I think it's totally possible, but too bad, we do not see any leaders, religious or civil, with the same courage, wisdom, and prudence as Reagan and John Paul. So it's a very, very, I guess the most difficult situation of underground Christians, especially underground Catholics, is that they have been trying to be loyal to the Vatican for the past 70 years by not joining the Patriotic Association. And yet now they just feel so betrayed by Rome. I mean, there is a 2019 document from the Vatican in regard to the civil registration, civil registration of clergy, to the CCP. So the statement was was telling Catholic clergy that even if in that statement that you have to sign, even if there is something that is manifestly contradictory to the teaching of the faith of the church, you could still sign it as long as you make a declaration to your bishop afterwards. Well, this is just pure apostasy. This is completely going against the 2,000 years tradition of the church. We study the early church martyrs. Early church martyrs, they would never compromise to the Roman authority. Not even to, put incense to an idol. They would never do that. They would always choose to die instead of caving in. And yet we see this statement from 2019 basically implicitly condoning, implicitly allowing Catholic priests to register, to sign something that is contradictory to the faith. That's a huge problem, as Cardinal Zen has pointed out repeatedly about this problematic document.
Yeah, has this resulted in a loss of faith, or have Catholics become Protestant? What is the impact on the body of believers?
Well, if you look at some recent, I guess I would say, I presume that the result is that one clear result is that the CCP was going around with that particular document from Rome and go around to underground church, underground priests, and tell them, well, your Pope has now authorized you guys to join the Patriotic Church. And I would say a lot of Catholic underground priests are not, very well educated, and they just saw the document and say, oh, well, I mean, I wouldn't say all of them cave in, but I would say probably some of them, I guess they probably didn't know better. Or maybe they were forced to join because of torture, or the bishop would, just sign them up. So last May, the Chinese police, they actually went to an underground seminary in Henan, in the Henan province, in May 2021. They, with 100 armed policemen, they arrested all the seminary professors, the bishop, and also they sent all the seminarians home. Why did they do that? Because that particular diocese in Henan, they were very insistent on not joining the Patriotic Association. So it sounds like the CCP is using, armed forces to go after the remaining Catholic dioceses that would not cooperate with the government.
So what can we do then? What can I do as a lay Catholic? What can Christians around the world do to help the persecuted church in Hong Kong, to help the church in the CCP where it's worse? I mean, I think that's the big fear, right? The big fear in Hong Kong is that those churches will have to become registered or become
that's right.
patriotic. How soon do you think that will happen? Does it seem imminent?
In Hong Kong, I think it's pretty imminent. I mean, when Carrie Lam ran for her office 5 years ago, she already proposed establishing Religious Affairs Bureau in Hong Kong, but she eventually pulled out from her election campaign because of some opposition from the Protestants. But this time around, when she's going to run again next month, I'm pretty sure she's going to put that into her election campaign. That being said, this Religious Affairs Bureau in Hong Kong will probably be established, I would say, probably in the next 1 or 2 years. In fact, those articles from the CCP propaganda newspaper that came out 2 weeks ago, they already mentioned the need to regulate Western religions like Christian churches. So it's utterly conceivable that they will impose that, because there is nothing left in Hong Kong, because press freedom was
so when Ta Kung Po when it's said in there that this needs to happen, they're basically telling you this is when people who can make it happen say this is what should happen, it's going to happen.
Yeah, it's going to happen. Yeah, it's just a matter of time. With the elimination of press freedom, with elimination of freedom of assembly, with a fair court system being gone, I mean, religious freedom is the only remaining difference between Hong Kong and the rest of China. And I'm pretty sure that the CCP would make sure that, this would be taken care of in the next few months or next 2 years or so.
So then we as Christians in the West need to be prepared to respond to this and make the CCP's partners, the tech companies, brands like Nike and Apple, they need to suffer consequences.
Right, exactly. I think they should, the free world should impose sanctions on, Western companies who choose to do business in China. I think that should happen, because otherwise, I mean, if you have Tesla or if you have YouTube, Google still doing business in China, the CCP will continue to thrive and survive. So I think that will be very, very important. Advocating for the US, UK government to make sure that all those high tech companies, all those Western companies would no longer do business in China. They would no longer manufacture the goods from China using the cheap labors, and just totally. I mean, that I guess that's the only way to destroy the Chinese economy.
Yeah, it's really something that some mentally deranged person a couple of years ago in California burned a Quran, and the world lost its mind. But then Apple deletes the Quran from its all apps in China. And the world doesn't even, Apple effectively burned millions of Quran.
Exactly. Yeah, but no one talking about it.
No, and have you seen the translations of these approved translations that they're pushing out, the CCP? One of them rewrites have you seen this? They rewrote the stoning of the woman caught in the act of adultery.
That's right. So that's not in the Bible per se. I think it's in the text book. One of the books that published by the CCP, they quote the biblical story, but they completely change it.
Yeah, Jesus actually stones the woman. I'm thinking, I'm a filmmaker, and I told my team we should make this as a short film, the gospel according to Xi Jinping, and we'll make it, and people can see how disgusting the worldview is. For people who don't know what the story they put in this textbook is, Jesus tells the Pharisees they can't stone the woman, and then when they all leave and she thinks she's saved, then he stones her, saying, I can't stone you because I'm the proper authority to do so.
Exactly. And of course the hidden agenda of changing the story is that, Jesus stoned the women because Jesus obeyed the law. Therefore, you Christians, you guys should obey the law as well. The law promulgated by the CCP, it's for national security as well. That's the hidden agenda.
Which is lawlessness, and that's why they despise any transcendent moral order. The Falun Gong, am I wrong to think the Falun Gong is less a religion than just a philosophy? Is that fair, or is it a religion?
I guess it's a Buddhist sect. But what's interesting about Falun Gong is when I grew up in Hong Kong, back in the 90s, I was a teenager, but in the 90s, that's immediately after the handover, I was everyone in Hong Kong was under the impression that the Falun Gong is a cult because we were brainwashed by the media. The media keeps telling us that the Falun Gong is a cult. It's until fairly recently, maybe in the past 2 or 3 years or so, that Hong Kong people come to realize that Falun Gong is not a cult. They actually, a good and proper religion or a good and proper group who would expose the atrocity by the CCP. The Falun Gong, they have a very good Epic Times, right? They have an office in Hong Kong, and they were one of the, apart from Apple Daily and a few other independent press, they were one of the press that actually report the truth. Report what's actually going on in Hong Kong. So, yeah.
Well, when people tell me the Falun Gongs are called, I say, hey, listen. When you bring up the name Enes Kanter Freedom, they go, oh, he's a Gulenist. You bring up Epoch Times, they say, oh, they're Falun Gong. Those are all cults. I said, all my friends are in cults. If that's the case, the only people I admire today are in cults, because Christianity's a cult. Okay, great, but the CCP is a death cult.
Right.
That's violent.
It's a criminal organization.
It's a transnational. Yeah, it's a transnational criminal organization that's soulless, and it's a destroyer of culture. And, I used to have Chinese students come to intern with me in my office in Hollywood. And I would always tell them, I'm really just so afraid to reach out to them because I'm so outspoken to the CCP. It's a fear of mine that any student that ever interned with me, or any Chinese students that heard me give a speech, we traded emails over the years, I would hate for them to get in trouble just for knowing me or having met me. But these students would come, and I would always tell them that their job as artists is to really reach into the roots of Chinese culture, and their art needs to come. You need to crack through the cement of the CCP. And I would tell this to students from China. They would have to take an axe and crack through the roots of the CCP, the concrete of the CCP, and to really tend to those flowers that have been smothered to resurrect your culture. It's as if in the West, 50 years ago, they killed every scholar and burned every copy of Shakespeare and Homer and Virgil and the church fathers. It would have been absolutely unimaginable. But this is what China has ahead of it. It's and when the CCP falls, I'm really looking forward to this just great flowering and beautiful renaissance of Catholic culture, but it's interesting that it's in the religions that they say are alien to China that are preserving Chinese culture. What the CCP calls alien are actually sheltering and preserving Chinese culture. Is that fair to say?
Right, yeah. I mean, they would often say that Western religions are, they're foreign to the Chinese culture, but the fact is that socialism is actually foreign to the Chinese culture. It comes from Soviet Union. I mean, it originates from a German philosophy. So the whole CCP ideology is foreign, and yet they say this is Chinese, and claim that any Western religions or ideologies are incompatible with the Chinese. So I mean, they just totally contradict themselves.
Yeah, and our religion isn't Western, is it? It's Semitic.
Right. But
communism is Western.
Right.
The ideologies that animate the CCP, which I think are not just communism, but they're Western.
Right.
But our religion is beautifully Semitic.
Right.
Well, we have our work cut out for us. It's up to us really, because we're the ones that have been fueling the CCP and empowering their this terror regime, this transnational criminal organization, and allowing them to smash the citizens of Hong Kong, cause Taiwan to tremble, terrorize Tibetans, imprison the Uyghur. What's the one thing you'd like to, when we wrap this up, what's the one thing you'd like listeners to know?
I would say, especially if you guys are Christians, and we follow the command of Jesus. There are some demons that cannot be cast out except by prayer and fasting. So I think that's definitely one thing that every one of us can do with prayer and fasting. You pray for the fall of communism, pray for all those persecuted Christians, and also do penance. Some types of fasting, some types of abstinence for this particular intention. I think that's the devil, the evil spirit behind the CCP would only be cast out if we really, take this command of our Lord Jesus into account, right? And apart from that, boycotting, certain companies that, that have close ties to China, or even I know some people who would boycott any things that are made in China. I mean, it's kind of difficult now, but then I guess it's possible, boycott any goods that are made in China. So, and of course, vote for any political candidates who are, who would choose to stand, who would choose to stand for the truth and fight against the CCP. I think that will be very, very important as well.
I'm writing these down, Reverend Allen. I'm gonna put them as bullet points in the body of the show and the show notes. And something else you said is that we need to work to a place where there are sanctions on corporations that do business in China. And I don't know if you know this, but big corporations like Apple and Costco and Coca-Cola and others lobbied Congress to gut the Uyghur Genocide Act. They worked to gut it to try to make it an impotent legislation, which it's just really hard. And that's where these Olympics have just driven it home that neoliberalism and the CCP are they're moving in the same direction. They're totalitarian surveillance. They want surveillance states. They want to monitor every move. They want to censor us. They calumniate anyone that protests for freedom, like the truckers in Hong Kong. They're calling terrorists and fascists. When you have Trudeau calling salt of the earth working class truckers and folks in the hundreds of thousands in Ottawa terrorists, I'm like, wow, you sound a lot like Xi.
Exactly. Yes, I agree.
Well, Reverend L, I thank you for coming on this pentathlon of podcasting. As we know, we about 2 years ago when I started working with the Uyghur community on this genocide games, we came up with this idea that we would try to not smear, but accurately present these games as the genocide games, and they were so distraught. And I said, a stumbling block a scandal is a stumbling block. You can stand on that stumbling block and give it an opportunity to amplify your message. And I really think that these Olympics, these genocide Olympics, when the history books are written, will be marked as the beginning of the end of the CCP, because the veil has been lifted. And I just hope inside CCP-controlled China, the people are aware of what a disgrace and how embarrassing these Olympics have been, and how the world now sees what the CCP is doing.
Exactly.
All right, Reverend Al, usually I would say, how can people find you? But we don't want anyone to find you. So you stay out of sight. Thank you for coming on our show. We're going to pray for you.
Thank you very much.
We're going to pray for the people of Hong Kong. And the truth is that if we don't free Hong Kong, if we don't free Tibet, if we don't keep Taiwan free, if we don't close the concentration camps with Uyghur inside, our children will be slaves. That's just the fact. That is 100% fact. Right. So the race to save China from the CCP, to save Hong Kong from the CCP, is really the race to save our posterity from a horror totalitarian surveillance state. And that's what's at stake.
Exactly right. Yep.
All right, Reverend, I'm going to land this show and sell some pillows. Mike Lindell, do you have I should get you some pillows. Do you have any MyPillow products?
I know of it. I don't have it.
Oh, all right. I'm going to call you after I close the show up. You don't even know. It's decadent. It is decadent. You know, with my organization, we're supporting Christians in hiding across Afghanistan and in Pakistan in their safe houses. And this might sound strange, but, you know, because they're living in pretty rugged conditions. But, you know, the Knights of the Hospitaller, the Knights of St. John, they would sleep on the dirt or on wood planks, but they would give those they served feather pillows, and they would feed them off of silverware, silver platters.
Oh, that's great.
So my whole thought is, well, what's better than a feather pillow? Mike Lindell's MyPillow is better than a feather pillow. I'm not going to sleep on a wood plank, but I can give the refugees we're helping MyPillow. I'm going to get you some MyPillow, all right?
Great. Thank you very much.
All right, Reverend Al. We'll talk again soon.
All right. God bless.
Thank you. All right, everybody. You heard it right there. Reverend Al, something he said was startling because it was so bold. He said, there needs to be sanctions. It's not enough that we boycott the CCP. There needs to be sanctions on businesses that continue to partner with the CCP against the people of China, so we can buy cheap crap in box stores. And I can tell you what, me having access to cheap crap in box stores in exchange for my grandchildren being slaves, not a deal. Do you know my children's grandmother and grandfather fled the communists, fled the CCP, had to hide. My mother-in-law had to hide her father, a nationalist general, put her in a monastery because he was afraid when they found the little girl, the communists would kill her. So my children's grandmother was menaced by the CCP. I am not going to let my mother-in-law's grandchildren and great-grandchildren be menaced by the CCP. So we need to work towards the point where we are sanctioning companies that do business with the CCP, and eventually it should be criminalized. I will tell you this, that before I give aid to anyone in Afghanistan, they reach out to us for aid, they're starving, they're hungry, they're afraid, the Taliban's chasing them. We have to search their name through a Treasury Department database to make sure they are not a bad actor, that they are not a terrorist. We do that with every name before we send so much as a loaf of bread. Yet Apple can partner with the CCP? Are you kidding me? Nike is in business with the CCP, having cotton in their products picked by slaves? That's true. That's not hyperbole or poetry. The Uyghur slaves pick cotton. And you probably have products in your home with cotton picked by slaves. Oh, but we're so great. We're so wonderful. So this is a great bullet point. I'm going to make this list, and I'm going to put it there. Also, I said that I was going to read after every show the names of all of the board members and CEOs of all the corporations sponsoring it. And a bunch of people emailed me and said, Jason, ain't nobody listening to that. Just continue to post it in the show notes. In the show notes, I will have posted the names of all the companies that have sponsored the Olympics. We're going to continue with our campaign, not 1 minute of the Olympics, not one product by any of the sponsors of these genocide games. And if you can commit to that, you win a gold medal in the pentathlon of podcasting as we boycott these genocide Olympics. This episode has been brought to you, of course, by Mike Lindell's MyPillow. He's got a big betting sale with huge discounts. You go to mypillow.com, click on the radio listener square, use the code Jones. There are also a lot of gifts. I don't know why I didn't get a flyer on this from the company. There's a lot of great Valentine's Day presents in there. Bathrobes, all kinds of stuff. So go to mypillow.com, use the code Jones, do your shopping, get your Valentine's gifts there. Saint Valentine's Day. I should do a Saint Valentine's Day special because the reality about Valentine's Day, Saint Valentine's Day, is so beautiful. It's a celebration of the sacrament of marriage. Now it's, a celebration of Netflix and chill. Those are two totally different things. This episode is also being brought to you by the Vulnerable People Project, standing in solidarity with the most vulnerable people in the world. From freedom activists in Hong Kong to the Uyghur and Chinese-occupied East Turkestan, to the Christians in the Nuba Mountains, to you. So join the team. Go to thegreatcampaign.org and become a monthly donor, and you get a free copy of my book, The Race to Save Our Century. I wrote that with the great John Zmirak, who's coming on tomorrow. John is coming on, I believe tomorrow or the next day, and we're going to do the weekend wrap-up, and that's always scandalous. Every time John is on, I figure if this show were a little bigger, I'd be canceled. I'm right under that, that line where I can avoid being canceled. I think we're going to talk about Whoopi Goldberg. We're going to talk about Mel Gibson. And, so it's going to be a great opportunity for scandal. All right. The pentathlon of podcasting continues. It's the Jason Jones Show. Till tomorrow. Aloha.
This has been the Jason Jones Show, powered by Mudhouse Media.